So today on Ignite Agility, we are welcoming back Ed Ballou.
Hi, everyone.
And I pulled some data before this conversation. The last time you and I did this was 2019. You were a newly minted advanced CSM. So it was like mid-2019, summerish. And you and I sat down to have a conversation fueled by something we were both following on Twitter and your love of the quote, "Someone on the internet is wrong."
Yes, it was so great. In fact, I'm wearing a shirt, though you probably can't exactly see it, that says "Practice Radical Empathy."
Nice.
So it's my reminder of when I see something on the internet that has triggered me, what I need to do.
Well,
maybe sometimes.
And in the case of that post, it wasn't necessarily, air quotes wrong, because it did come from Mr. Jeffries, but we talked about the empathy piece. How it could have come across pretty unempathetic to people newer, to the Agile community. So what fueled this particular podcast and the return of Ed Ballou is last week, there was a post on LinkedIn that was so bad. I picked up my phone after getting sucked in to commenting on it, and I texted Ed Ballou, and I said, "Someone on LinkedIn is wrong." And you said, "Show me."
Send me the link.
And I sucked you into it. So we don't need to disparage or to name names, but give me the short version of what sucked you in when I shared the link with you.
Oh, I love tensions. I mean, just in general, I don't know, I kind of just get baited by the fact that, hey, this is causing some energy to happen. What's trying to occur? So I pulled up the link and started reading.
And my recollection, and the reason I have to go solely from memory, is because in trying to reference a few notes before our conversation today, I went back to look at it, and I've been blocked.
Oh, rats.
I know, cancel culture.
Funny how that happens.
And if you recall, I wasn't even one of the ones being mean to the person who made the original post. I, as an educator, was trying to exhibit empathy and was trying to educate, because some of the things that the person was posting were just factually incorrect. Not up for debate or opinion about right or wrong, but just factually incorrect. I don't know if that's your recollection as well, but.
Yeah. I mean, that's how we debate and we state facts, but when we can't even agree on what truth is, that makes it a little bit difficult and creates the kind of the cancel culture vibe. So. Totally.
Yeah, and one of the other responses was to the person who did the post was, dude, your aversion to learning is staggering, because they were taking things completely out of context about Scrum from 1995, and then touting it as canon, and my point was continuous improvement. A lot of things in Scrum have changed several times since 1995, most recently November of 2020. But there was no openness to current definitions on the part of the poster.
Absolutely. It's so important to, I mean, there's sense in looking back contextually as what was appropriate at that time. What did people need to communicate to make their own transformations in their mind about going from waterfall to Scrum, or wherever they were at process-wise to Scrum. And sometimes you have to kind of admit some sort of different term that kind of bastardizes the what you're trying to get at, but it's the only thing that you can use to relate with that person and get them to pivot. Oh, it's like this. I can say ball to my children and we're fine, but it really matters on what type of ball we're playing with. So, and the game that we're playing, right? So that's why I saw that and I was like, well, are they trying to relate a little, too much to where it was and saying that that's not contextually appropriate anymore? Or are they trying to just really like sync back to, I remember even in our Scrum trainings, we would talk back about the original origins of Agile. And yes, that was a document back in, you quote me on the...
1995.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like not stuck back there. Hopefully. And wasn't there something in either a response you read or a response from the poster where the comment was, well, that's too agile, or you're too agile?
What does that even mean? That's...
Because I got a text from you right after saying, trademark, too agile. I'm going to put it on my, profile that I'm too agile, or we're going to make a certification for being too agile.
Oh, yes. Now I'm looking back at my text here and yep, I'm putting too agile on my LinkedIn profile.
Yeah. And I don't even know how that's possible, but I do like the way you characterized that, what was appropriate for the time. So I can tell you in 1995, I was still a card-carrying project manager, and now I'm a recovered project manager. And some people don't know that although Ken Schwaber is one of the co-creators of Scrum, he used to be a big proponent of project management. He used to teach, people project management. So in one of his first books, Agile Project Management with Scrum, which I read because I was recovering from project management, and I felt like it was a bit of a head fake title, right? Just kind of reeled you in to pummel you for a couple hundred pages about why there's no such thing. But I think it's the reference he had at that time. And it's like, hey, if I don't put some of these things in terms that these people know, they're not even going to get interested. They're not even going to check out what this thing called Agile is or what this thing called Scrum is. So that's what sucked me in, not only, to that book originally, but to that post that I shared with you. And not just because it was causing lots of tension.
Yeah, I look back to there's an excellent article I read, and it was on Agile for All's website about the circle of change, the wheel of change. And one of the quadrants in there is the things to accept. And I found that very, very helpful in a lot of my retros and conversations with people about change and concerning change. And when there's tensions in place, is what do we have to accept in this moment? As like, I don't like that's not part of the change, or that's not part of the agility that I believe that we can achieve here. However, I'm going to accept this for the moment because it is in some ways iterative. May not be challenging enough to where we think we can go, but we got to get to that. We got to coach to that point. And so that's a very helpful word that I use in having those change conversations. What am I going to accept right now, even though I don't like this? Because then once I identify that, then it's like, okay, given that I'm accepting these things, let's focus on the other areas of the other quadrants, what I can create, what I can eliminate, and then what I can preserve.
And in looking back at our last conversation and where you were at as a practitioner, because it's hard to believe it's 2021. I always say that 2020 is kind of the lost year, or it was kind of the blip. You not only are no longer an ACSM, you are now a certified Scrum professional Scrum Master, so you're a CSP, and you have survived Certified Less Practitioner with Craig Larman.
I did. It was a process of survival and unlearning and relearning and kind of rumbling with the deepest, darkest of how we're actually operating as organizations out there, and how I always had theories on how poorly we were operating, but by and large, that there's a means to deconstruct this a lot better, and then a language that you can build around that to foster, awesome change conversations.
Do you think sitting here today, having gone through those things and it being almost a couple of years later, your perspective is different? Because I appreciated back in 2019 the way that the lack of empathy may have come across for two jaded people like me and Ron Jeffries, tweeting to people about some of this stuff. What's your perspective now? Do you see kind of why the jadedness on some of our behalves, or?
Oh, totally. You can get really frustrated. I mean, there have been points in my career where I've been frustrated at the lack of progress or just the naivety of mindsets and that sort of thing. It kind of comes just, how are you going to react to that in that moment?
Mm-hmm. And I remember talking to Craig Larman after one of the many certified less practitioner courses we've held, because we host him multiple times a year. And a couple of us on the team were pretty frustrated about a few things, and he laughed in our face. Partially, I think, because adult beverages were being served and he was doing his book signing. But he said, it's all just temporary. Just, you guys are getting whipped up for no good reason. It's all just temporary. And I'm like, well, easy for you to say, Mr. I've authored 3 books and I'm in a completely different place in my life. But any thoughts from having gone through that deeper learning, with the structural change and the behavioral change it brings about from where you are now, as opposed to when you started with all this stuff going, ooh, Scrum, shiny object?
Yeah, it was a huge shift in just understanding you start out as like procedural, and we just do these events and we have these roles and we get agile. And the coaching that happens therein is so much more in between the scenes and slowly revealing what are the problems and where we have ability to move forward a little bit in yes, our processes, but also just who we are being in a team, in an organization, and even to go back to the fundamental roots is just personal agility. Mm-hmm. It's just like one subject that I've really hit on, even over the pandemic, and just taking on hobbies, taking on new responsibilities, thinking of things in new ways, approaching it, asking more questions rather than telling answers, and saying, and being willing to throw off some really easy wins via questions back to the people that are participating in the change. It's like, today I got a question like, what color should we use in that label? Yeah. I was wise enough to not say I don't care.
Because of course you care, but what did you really mean?
I meant, you know what, label colors could be very important, and while we can figure that out, let's reserve that to another time when that will reveal itself to us, and then we'll have a little more agreement, a little more opinions. But for right now, in this moment, I don't care what the colors are.
And did they accept that, or were they like, well, we have to have labels?
Well, they still wanted the labels,
they have to be color coded.
Yeah, the color codes was we could toss that forward, and I think that's the kind of thing of like having that sense of this is the battles that we need to pick right now, and then admitting like, yeah, that we don't need to get bogged down by that discussion. Let's keep on moving. Mm-hmm. And then when it's clear, there'll be somebody will, hey, how about that? Because I mean, there are those ideas that you're like, I really want to get to this thing, but I'm going to wait until it resonates a little bit harder or more well with the group that's going through the change. So we tossed it for right now.
And are you all virtual right now still?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Any plans to go back to in person?
Not yet, because we're spread over multiple different offices all over the U.S. So it presents its own unique challenges in that. And then even with our offices downtown Minneapolis, that also presents its deal of challenges as well. So yeah, trying to figure all that out, and when, you know, all the vaccinations and what all is going to come into that decision-making process. And it's just interesting to kind of sit back and watch change kind of be forced upon us as an organization to deal with this thing. And it's definitely a chance to I guess I savor it and watch it, because I know that we're having to make decisions and practice agility in the moment to figure out what to do as a business. And I like that, because come on, let's make a decision. Like, let's keep this moving. And so it's been good to see the slow progression of that over time.
COVID definitely has forced organizations who thought they were agile to prove it, because there's so many who, you know, said they were, who were just almost whipsawed by the change and then froze, deer in the headlights. Whereas those of us who understand transparency, inspect, adapt, transparency, inspect, adapt, pivoted, no problem. And I think being empathetic with our teams right now, you know, which is kind of what you alluded to with the label question, is really important, because even flipping our classes to virtual, it was not uncommon for me to say to a in-person room of people, you know, the average adult learner needs to hear things somewhere between 5 to 7 times at that time. I swear to God, it's like 10 or more now. But, you know, so I would get to like the 3rd or 4th time of answering the exact same thing, even when they were all in person, engaged. And I would say, who would like to answer that question? Because I just go a little crazy answering the same thing that many times. Well, in the virtual world, I've noticed that people have no patience with each other, because I will only be on my 3rd time, so I won't even be at the point of saying, who would like to answer that question yet? And a bunch of people will unmute themselves and go, she just said that. And I'm just like, pump the hate brakes. You know, because it's not that they were not listening necessarily, and that's the assumption some of these people are making. It's the transmission of the information, because God bless technology, or your bad Wi-Fi connection, or fighting for bandwidth with your neighbors, you know, if you don't have decent Wi-Fi. But it's also the cultural difference, because overnight it's been a global marketplace. And I have people joining from places that I never dreamed I would have somebody attending a training class from. And so they're probably processing in their native language, listening in English, trying to, you know, they're doing, it just takes them a minute. So it's like, could you give me that one more time? And so for their classmates to be so hard on them, you know, it's like, she just said that.
Oh, yeah. Well, we even had a similar moment in our CSPSM class, and that we had to literally stop the class for a little bit, because one person, this was not their native language, and they're like, I don't know what that word means. And
it was venting.
yeah,
remember?
yes.
He goes, it is not in the Cambridge Oxford Dictionary. What does this word mean? And we're all like, we have to explain venting.
And how many times does that happen even within our all English offices, and yet somebody totally does not understand a word or a concept, and we don't pick up on that. We don't see their facial reactions, you know, because their cameras are off or something like that. And so it makes it really difficult to pause, or we're like just motoring through this because we got to get more work done, you know, and we forget to pause and get everybody caught up to speed and look around and look at the eyes in the room, look at their engagement, all that kind of thing.
The fun part of that conversation for me was not only the realization that the term venting is such an Americanism, or kind of a, you know, American slang, but it was listening to the rest of you try to explain it in a way that made sense to that other person. Because you could watch him just going, how is this helpful? Why do you people do this? It was just amazing. It was just like, yeah, we should just stop that. Because he's like, sounds an awful lot like complaining. Yeah, it just sounds like a bunch of complaining without going anywhere. Yeah, kind of nailed it, buddy. Even though you don't speak our language. Yeah, you got it. Yeah. So I don't know. What other world problems can we solve today, Ed?
Oh, man. There's so many. So many.
Where do you think this Scrummy and Agile stuff is going? Because, my thought is, from my perspective, I feel like we've kind of hit, beyond late adoption, kind of entering into laggardville, as I affectionately call it. When you think about the law of diffusion of innovation, and just given the sheer number of years that this has been around. But I don't think I'm a decent judge of that. Having been somebody that chose early on to get in there and start teaching people this stuff or educating people on this stuff. Do you think there's a long way to go, or do you think that the next shiny object is around the corner?
Hot take. All right. I like the question. I like the room for a hot take here. I think that the organizations that had the money to iterate through change slowly and mature through their transformations will continue to have it. But now I think that they're gonna start seeing the effects of making those decisions over the long haul. And I think that they'll have to struggle to catch up because they'll see the competition coming up quickly, and then they'll have to switch pace really quickly, or they'll still have buttloads of money to keep on doing what they're doing and mature. And you'll still see, lots of what is Scrum still around. What is this Agile thing still? And I think that those organizations that have the money to pay for it will continue to implement it slowly and look at different frameworks. So I don't think that you're going to see those die away anytime soon, in my opinion. Will there be new frameworks? Yeah. And how I think the diagnostic that I would throw on anything future is the ability for any individual, team, organization to transfer knowledge. That seems to be the root of where everything centers around is how fast we can get somebody up to speed on a thing and get and then to ripple through the organization. And of course, there's different means and measures of accomplishing that. But I think that's the system that will be gamed in the future. And while there's many frameworks out there for that, teaching has not gone away as a profession.
Right.
But it's just we have different tools now available to us. And we're sending, our kids have been schooled at home in many cases. So these are drastically new things that are going to change the way we learn and acquire knowledge. YouTube videos, COVID hobbies, all that kind of stuff, emerging communities on Slack and Discord that is just reshaping the way we're transferring knowledge. I think is going to be an interesting, play on what's ahead in the future.
One of our clients has said to us directly, and not, an official statement, totally an unofficial statement from somebody who is frustrated from trying to get them to adapt. The comment was, "We have enough money to die a really slow death."
100%. 100%.
And I'm like, but you will die. And it came about from a conversation about still looking for COBOL programmers, and it started because I made a really bad joke about that. And one of the things that they shared is that instead of adapting, because it's become a global marketplace overnight, other countries don't have the arrogant view that some of the United States-based programmers and developers have. So you have people in other countries furiously learning COBOL so that they can bill themselves out to these United States companies who have not yet adapted at lower rates and let them preserve the status quo even longer. And I was just like, okay, hadn't really thought of that. I mean, so yeah, they got a little boost in their life support with this opening up the global marketplace even further.
Oh yeah.
Than it had already been doing before the pandemic.
Yeah, one of my other projects is kind of laying the foundation for that to be transacted upon and people to participate in a global market, even if they even live in a third world country, get them a computer, and then there's an infrastructure that they can use to not only communicate back and forth with each other, but then also get paid. As soon as the money can transfer, then that they can have a balance, they can have tradable commodities, and then you put that with the ability to communicate over that back and forth. You have a really interesting situation for COBOL programming to come up and many other skills that we thought were dead and that they could come back very, very easily.
I don't know, I'm thinking I should go dust that off. I mean, I taught a number of COBOL programmers how to develop in Oracle back in my day when I was developing, but I don't know. The want-to factor has to be there. The motivation factor has to be there. So in you and I having this joke about, someone on the internet is wrong. Someone on LinkedIn is wrong. And getting sucked in. One of the things I said to the group I was working with this week on the ACSM is, I go out of my way really, really hard during class to not say right, wrong, bad, good, because these are just choices, right? These are just choices. So in making fun of myself, in embracing that line, someone on the internet is wrong, and getting sucked in, it really wasn't about right, wrong, bad, good, or anything like that. It's just that when it is factually incorrect, I feel like change, learning, empathy, all the things we've been talking about just come to a standstill. I think it just becomes a conversation over for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, it can stymie so much when there is that lack of empathy or lack of understanding. And then, of course, there's the reaction that we commonly get is we want to go ahead and have that confrontational conversation and understand what are the facts and process through some amount of disagreement. And we're not very good at that, especially on the internet. Oh my gosh, especially on the internet. That might be the next revolutionary tool, is like some tool to process through disagreement and actually work through it and like build on it towards consensus. And I know that there's lots of other like consensus making frameworks that are starting to emerge now, but I think that's the thing. And if you react too quickly to it or try and say, well, that's just not agile, well, then they're like, well,
who cares? So what? I always tell my students, if you're going to use phrases like that, like, that's not agile, that's not Scrum, to fully be prepared for, so what? Who cares? Mm-hmm. As the response. And they're like, well, would you agree with that? And I'm like, yeah, I might. Because, what problem are you trying to solve? What's your goal? These are the more important things than, going agile or using Scrum perfectly. I mean, that's the point that's being missed. And I think that the poster that you and I started talking about on LinkedIn was missing that completely.
It was more to make a point than to to establish a collaboration. And that's what I look for in a lot of my interactions, is like trying to add to the energy and the cohesion of the collaboration as we're right. proceeding through that conversation. And if we're not adding to what each other is saying, then are we even really listening at all?
Right. And for our listeners, what they're learning today is to get Ed back on Angela's podcast, all you got to do is go post something inflammatory on social media, because we'll be watching.
Totally. Just make Angela mad or make Ed mad, and then we'll be there. We will text each other about you.
Well, Ed, thanks for being back on Ignite Agility.
Thank you, Angela.
Is that good, producer?